The victory fanfare alone, he spins it around like he's from North Carolina. Final Fantasy VII Remake Revisited, Chapter 1, Destruction of the Mako Reactor 1. This is the first chapter in the Remake Revisited series that they are doing over at Square Enix to get us interested in Part 2 and also give us a little bit more information on what they've already done with Part 1. All right, June 16th. Square Enix released an interview series for Final Fantasy VII Remake Revisited. In the first installment, they take a deep dive on the destruction of Mako Reactor 1. This year is Final Fantasy VII's 25th anniversary, and the celebrations have begun. As part of an ongoing festivities taking place this year, the development team behind the Final Fantasy VII Remake have graciously agreed to dive deeper into the game than ever before. They've answered all our questions about RPG, from queries about characters, storyline, and world design, through to the secrets of the combat system, plus a few silly questions thrown in too. Over the coming months, we will be revisiting the thoughts, memories, and anecdotes from the development of Final Fantasy VII Remake, starting with the very first chapter of the game, the iconic bombing mission. If you have yet to play Final Fantasy VII Remake, go and play it now. Be aware of spoilers. With that warning out of the way, let's mosey. Let's Mosey is a nod to the dialogue between Cloud and Cid at the end of the original 1997 game, where Cloud says, "All right, let's mosey," and Cid calls him out for sounding like a wimp. All right, who designed the posters and vending machines featured throughout the train station, and why were these designs chosen? Were there any designs which were cut from the final release of the game? If so, why? I designed these together with several other designers. Some of the posters look like they were intended to spread the influence of the Shinra company in public spaces. And there are also some more generic ones. We put a number of unique Final Fantasy references and Shinra promotion into the products being advertised to enhance immersion in the world of the game. That said, there were some designs that were rejected because they were too similar to advertising slogans used by real-world companies. I remember seeing a lot of advertisements throughout my playthrough in the reactor, and really throughout the game itself, and as a whole. But I don't know. Let me know in the comments below if you recognize any of the other Final Fantasy references that they mentioned in here. Were they strictly for Final Fantasy VII, or did they reach out and touch some of the other mainline titles in the series? How are the information boards constructed? Does a timetable for all trains in Midgar exist, or were these created specifically for this one scene? These timetables were created specifically for the very modern-day looking Sector 1 station. We struggled a fair bit when designing them. Despite the fact that they are not really related to how the game plays out, we started with the time that the last train would leave, and then worked back to what the monitor would show at the time the scene takes place. When considering what kind of gap there would be between trains, we knew it was a service in a major city, but also considered that the majority of the passengers using it would be Mako Reactor staff. If we managed to put together a full timetable of all the trains in Midgar, then I reckon we could all become railway employees for real. In the original 1997 version, they didn't have to go into great detail on anything, really. It's a lot of polygons, and I think the random encounters actually pull you away from the backgrounds that they were using. But here in the remake, you're always in the environment, and as you're fighting, you're watching, what the Buster Sword is swinging into. You're watching where the enemies are come from, and where the enemies are flying into. So it's interesting that they had to go into as much detail as they did for something as simple as a train schedule. Even in this early part of the game, the script is already far more detailed than the original Final Fantasy VII. How was the original script used in the creation of Final Fantasy VII Remake, and how much did it need to be adapted? The role that the script plays in a game has changed a lot in the time between when we made the original and the remake. At the time of the original Final Fantasy VII, all a script needed was to do was convey the initial story of the game, but nowadays it's also used as a script for the motion capture and voice recordings with the actors who don't know a lot about the game. It also needs to contain a lot more detail about the backdrops and locations that don't exist yet. So everyone on the extended development team are all working towards the same image. As the design work progresses, we also need to add in additional notes about the character's emotional states or the nature of the situation at the time. Is literally what I was just saying. There's so much additional detail work that you need to incorporate to paint an immersive picture for your audience. Having the ability to see a character up close means you need to have them do more than just blink and swing their polygon arms. When we were putting together the script for Final Fantasy VII Remake, we did play through the original game and watch play videos for reference, but we didn't often refer to the original script directly. Instead, we put a lot of emphasis on the feelings and impressions that we got from a particular scene when we played the original and would enhance those moments in the new dramatization. Now, if only they could capture the way it made them feel, the first time they played through it, because once you go back, you already have you have an understanding. You're almost forcing yourself to bring on this emotion, to make that emotion come out again, because you have new knowledge of what's happened to the characters and how much their story has developed. As Cloud switches to Punisher mode, it looks as though he takes up a stance similar to how Sephiroth fights in the original Final Fantasy VII. Is this intentional? If so, is this something he learned from his time in Soldier, or him imitating his ex-hero? We didn't specifically set out to imply a detail like that. We just wanted something that would clearly look different from Cloud's regular stance to get across the fact that he has changed attack modes. We collaborated with the motion designers to find a ready position that would look good and flow easily into blocks and attacks, while also fitting with Cloud's personality. The fact that it is a logical stance to take may have resulted in it resembling Sephiroth's style in the end. Unintentionally, I think that's a really cool modification, and to note how close it actually looks like Sephiroth is interesting, albeit, it looks very difficult to wield the Buster Sword with the same strength and dexterity that you would Sephiroth's sword. The lifts and elevators that the team take to get to the reactor core look far cleaner than the versions from the original game. Why were these given a complete overhaul? One of the important themes we set for the remake was to depict the everyday lives of the people in Midgar, so there were some things we changed to give the better idea of their presence. For Mako Reactor 1, we reimagined it as a still deteriorating, but maintained quite frequently. The intention here was to create the impression that the reactor staff might have been using the same elevator until moments ago, and thus give the player the idea that the people of Midgar are closely involved with Mako energy in their lives. I think the entire world of Final Fantasy VII Remake feels lived in, very lived in. It's almost every environment in the game was full of people actively going about their lives. I'm curious to see if in Rebirth, how the open world, if they decide to go that way, will feel if they go in the direction of very lived in, if it becomes something that is full of life. Are they able to capture the essence of wildlife in each of the different continents near the Midgar reactor, open fields, valleys, etc., mountainous terrain, snowy terrain? Can they capture that same feel as they did when you're going through a linear or wide linear game environment? the laser beam minigame was added to Final Fantasy VII Remake from the original game. Was this designed from the ground up for Final Fantasy VII Remake, or was it an idea that was intended for Final Fantasy VII that couldn't be added at the time? This wasn't something that was concepted for the original Final Fantasy VII. We needed to include tutorials for the various different gameplay features in Chapter 1, and use the lasers as a way to explain the dash controls and introduce Jesse's personality at the same time, all tied together as part of the experience of infiltrating the Mako Reactor. And you got a little image of it down here. Jesse's personality, to me, stood out a lot more in this game than it did in the 1997 original. You could tell she was interested in the original, but here she doesn't hide it at all. Her down-to-earth charm actually, in my opinion, makes her one of the best girls in the game. We love Jesse's reaction to the laser beam minigame, and in general, how carefree and relaxed she is about the whole mission. Why isn't she tense like Cloud and Barrett are? Jessie has always had a laid-back and easygoing personality, and one side of that is how she does things to ease tension of the other members in the group. It's not just Jessie. The other members of Avalanche also have a somewhat casual, student protest kind of approach to taking down Shinra and protecting the planet. Jessie and the team did not imagine that they would cause such extensive damage with their first bombing mission at Reactor 1, so they fell right into Shinra's trap. Later on, they are tricked into inflicting major casualties on Sector 8 and the surrounding area. From then onwards, Avalanche gradually takes on a more serious mood. I can see how this is the case. Aside from Barrett, who in the beginning has more of a cold exterior, the other members of Avalanche almost feel aloof. Not to what their mission is, but like how much damage they could actually cause, as Avalanche is an extremist organization. And, you know, the road to hell is paved with good intentions, so they say. Why is there a choice for the bomb timer detonation timer? Does this impact anything in the game? Having the player set the timer to increase the feeling of urgency during the escape section after defeating the Scorpion Sentinel was the essence of why this was added. The effect of this choice on the game is to add more to the reward Jesse gives you in Chapter 2. Whoa. What? I knew that, you know, your ability to perform in the motorcycle minigame, you know, changed a cutscene with Jesse, but I did not know that the timer that you had to fight the Scorpion Sentinel actually affected the game and in any of the interactions with Jesse. Now I have to go back and see if I did that, or maybe, you know, I'll replay on hard mode or something, and see if I can't figure it out myself. If you know what the reward is, comment below. Also, not having the timer count down during the Scorpion Sentinel fight like it did in the original Final Fantasy VII was because we felt that it gave a lot of stress to players who were not used to the battle system yet. So we decided it should start after the battle finished instead. Interesting. Yeah, set timer. How are all the Scorpion Sentinels attacks thought up and created? Some are based on the Guard Scorpion from Final Fantasy VII, but the new attacks and even the way it moves and jumps around are certainly new to Final Fantasy VII Remake. It goes without saying that we wanted to respect the movements the boss had in the original game, so we used as many of those as we could. However, Remake switches the gameplay to real-time action, so there were a lot of things that we could not capture if we just stuck to the moves it originally had. Even though it is an action game, if we went for a system that relied purely on players' reflexes, it would raise the barrier to entry for people who do not usually play many action games. Thus, we tried to make it so that the advantages and disadvantages from where you stand became important and allow players to think strategically about how to approach the fight over a comparatively long time span. The result of looking at the battle from that perspective was that we searched for motions we could use based on an awareness of the Scorpion Sentinel's character. We wanted to clearly communicate things like where is the player from the Sentinel's perspective, and is that the right place to stand or the right distance away? Does that position pose a danger or not? I remember playing through the demo for Final Fantasy Remake before the full Part 1 was released, and I was so impressed with how this battle felt. It felt new, but it also paid tribute to the original. The new battle system definitely made it interesting. Experiencing this boss for the first time actually felt challenging. Is Barret strong enough to wield Cloud's Buster Sword with one hand? This is like the Avengers, can you pick up Thor's hammer version of, can Barret pick up Cloud's Buster Sword? Barret's biceps are clearly massive when you see them in game, and easy to understand comparison. The surface area of a cross-section of Barret's upper arm is around 4 times as larger than Cloud's. If you extrapolate this difference in terms of physical strength, then yes, Barret does look like he could lift and chop with a Buster Sword in one hand. However, that is very different thing to asking if he could wield it as a weapon. If we assume that the Buster Sword is made from iron, then it would be a gigantic sword that weighs around 40 kilograms, and there would be many factors required to actually wield it effectively other than just brawn. So Barret is clearly massive compared to Cloud. Sort of. Cloud's an ex-soldier, so he might have a little bit extra strength if you take away the immediate visual physicality. But Cloud is frequently seen swinging this thing, wielding it with one hand. The victory fanfare alone, he spins it around like he's from North Carolina.
My name is Cloud.
Motherlicker. This 40 kilogram iron sword, approximately 88 pounds, definitely comes down to, I guess, training. Basically, this shows just how amazing Cloud is for being able to use it so elegantly. God forbid Barret is right-handed. That alone could make him a clumsy swordsman. We hope you enjoyed reading this first chapter of Final Fantasy VII Remake Revisited and are looking forward to learning more from behind the scenes of the game over the coming months. All right. If you haven't played through the game yet, definitely be sure to check that out. Final Fantasy VII Remake, Part 1 of a 3-part trilogy. Part 2, Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, will be around next winter, somewhere between December and March, if we are using, typical seasons. Sometimes Square Enix likes to dip out of them a little bit, but we'll see if they can come through. If you enjoy this type of content, be sure to like and subscribe. It really does help the channel. Turn the notifications on for future updates. And as always, thanks for watching.